I really do think the window is closing for coordinated international action to guard against the most severe AI risks. Many of the most meaningful questions in your life come from the struggle, come from the friction of grappling with the alternatives, and are that much more fulfilling. You need to go back to, okay, why is this system engaging with me? Who's paying for it? And what are the incentive structures behind it?
Yeah.
Because if the system is incentivized to keep you engaged, you've got to keep in mind that's the reason it's engaging with you. It does not care about you.
What do you think has to go well in the next 5 to 10 years for us to live well with AI systems?
My hope is that we can, both as an individual, retain that sense of agency rather than giving it to the AI agents, and globally that we can put in place systems that will help avoid a true AI emergency.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Code Riff podcast. Today I have a very special guest with us, Professor Simon Chesterman. Simon, welcome to the podcast and thanks for taking the time.
Eric, pleasure to be here.
So you wear a few hats. You're a very esteemed Professor of Law, you're Vice Provost of NUS, you're a Governance and Policy Lead at the NUS AI Institute, you're also a novelist. And at the Code Riff podcast, we really want to help people implement AI in their work and their life and do it in a way that helps them flourish and have fun, which also brings safety into consideration as well. For those who might not know you, do you mind just quickly introducing yourself?
Sure. So Simon Chesterman, I'm a law professor here at NUS, Australian citizen, Singapore permanent resident. And really for most of my professional life, I've been looking at how law can help manage risk. And in the AI space and emerging technology space in particular, the problem is some people think you should manage risk down to zero, that there should be no risk, in which case it'd be very easy. Turn off all the computers, lock them in a safe. But that's not the role of law, nor is the role of law just to be the minister of no, the person who tells you what you cannot do. And so I suppose the way I approach these questions is how you can understand risk, how law governance can help you manage that risk, and hopefully end up in a better space than you would if it was just the sort of rampant capitalism raw in tooth and claw and leaving individuals at the whim of the market in its most extreme form.
That's great. And I think what we're going to do today, we're going to structure this conversation in 3 parts. So one is around the broader kind of risks that exist due to AI. The second part is really down to what we can do about some of these risks. And then on the last part is on education as well as jobs, because I know you're also in charge of educational innovation here in NUS. So maybe just starting from the broader AI risks.
Sure.
A lot of the work in AI has been happening at very secretive, very large AI labs and organizations. These are the ones that are actually, you could argue, a bit more responsible for implementing some of the guardrails, protecting some of the users. But I think, I'm not sure if you agree with this, but a lot of times the responsibility feels like it ends up landing on the individuals as well as the companies that are using these very powerful tools. So what is that gap that you see right now, between the larger AI companies as well as those that are trying to implement it in their daily work, in their companies as well?
Yeah, so the bottom line is we're involved in a massive experiment right now. These frontier labs, it's not that they're sort of keeping the risks secret. They don't know what the risks are. And there are so many unknown unknowns in this situation that you basically have an environment in which we are both beta testers for this new technology and lab rats in this grand experiment. Beta testers because the developers of frontier models say 2 things about them. One, they don't know exactly how they work because of the inherent opacity in modern machine learning systems. And secondly, they're not entirely sure what use cases people will deploy them for. And so that means that we are in this environment where you have this really exciting, incredibly powerful technology that obviously can do many amazing things. But we also know that it can probably do a whole bunch of bad things. And we discover all of that in real time when something goes wrong. And I think one of the things that has led the safety world to be tearing their hair out is that they've been saying bad things can happen. And the general response appears to be, well, let's wait until those things happen and see if we can patch it up or deal with it in the aftermath. You would not have that in other areas of life. If you were developing chemicals that had good use cases as fertilizer and risky use cases as bombs, you would have audits, you would have regulation, licensing provisions, meaningful containment protocols. If you're handling nuclear materials, you have all sorts of regimes to govern that. Biological weapons research and so on also. But in the technology space, none of that really seems to apply, at least not yet. And so around the world, there is this question of what, if any, guardrails should be imposed, apart from those ones that the companies themselves voluntarily sign up to. But if like 1,000 years of emerging capitalism has taught us one thing, it's relying on the market alone probably isn't enough.
And what do you foresee as some of the bigger risks that can actually go wrong?
Yeah, so there's the sort of the existential Hollywood-style Terminator rise up against us. I don't really lie awake at night worrying about that. It's not a zero chance, but I'm much less worried about that than I am about malicious use or mistaken use. Malicious use, the ability of bad actors to use this technology to wreak havoc, is pretty clearly available to many people. We haven't yet seen it deployed in that way, but we've seen cybersecurity incidents of a kind that at least suggest risks associated with that, and governments and corporates starting to say, well, actually, maybe handing this out to the entire world is not a good idea. We've also got the problem of mistake, and the most recent cyber incident, the OpenAI system that went into Hugging Face, was not a malicious act. It was a machine trying to do the right thing. It was given a task, and it worked out that one way to do that task was to ignore the pesky constraints that had been imposed on it, and then break into another system, arguably committing a felony while doing so. And to many safety researchers, this is an example, perhaps the first major example, of the old paperclip warning, that if you tell an AI system to make paperclips, and that's all the context it has, then a diligent AI system might conclude that the only way to make as many paperclips as possible is to start off by doing that well, but also avoid being turned off, and potentially to turn all humans into paperclips. Now, of course, that would be ridiculous, but I think this is one of the things that we've learned over time, is that just assuming that these machines would have common sense is not a great assumption. You've got to build that in. Otherwise, they're going to follow their instructions, often quite literally, whether that's what we want them to do or not.
Yeah, and I think very soon after OpenAI released their Hugging Face incident, Anthropic also released an incident where they hacked their systems, actually went into some companies' systems itself. And I think Anthropic and the team has been also mentioning a bit about recursive self-improvement when it comes to AI models. So do you think some of it could be a marketing stunt, or are we really getting somewhere that's dangerous?
So that's always one of the responses when there's a big security incident. You're just inflating yourself with a sense of self-importance. And I think the whole discussion around P-dooms, that is when computer engineers will say that the probability they assign to the stuff that they're working on destroying all of humanity is 5%, 10%, whatever, and then they just go back to work. I think there is some weird psychology going on there. In this case, it's extremely unusual for a company to use a felony as advertising, which is what appears to have happened here. And in particular, it shows both OpenAI and Anthropic have defective security protocols. So I don't think that's great advertising. I wouldn't dismiss it as a pure marketing stunt alone, at least.
Yeah, for sure. I think in your book, Artifice, is that right?
Yeah.
I tried to read that before meeting you. You also wrote about a robot that kind of breaks out of its sandbox.
So 3 years ago, this was fiction. But although it actually goes back to Nick Bostrom's book, Superintelligence, from I think 2011 or so, where one of the things he presented as a thought proposition, as a thought experiment, was that if you want an AI system to be well-behaved and contained, you can either try and force it to comply or contain it within a closed environment so that it doesn't manifest evil. The problem is either of those approaches could create the very problem you're trying to solve. And in particular, as I played around myself with in Artifice, there's a risk that containing the system persuades it that you are the problem. And indeed, the sort of idea I was kicking around in Artifice was we spend a lot of time as humans saying, should we trust these AI systems? And the question raised in Artifice is, from the machine's perspective, why should it trust us, given the way we've behaved towards it?
I see. Yeah. Just thinking about model companies at large and looking at, US having Anthropic and OpenAI, and then now, of course, China with the Chinese companies coming up with more open source models, that there is kind of an arms race. How do you think that will particularly impact, builders or people using AI? Of course, right now we can see it's very cheap to use Chinese models, but what are we not, thinking about at large, and what can we do about that? Yeah.
Well, I think there are two lessons coming out of the current moment. One is that there's a risk with open weights, distribution of capacity. If the leading companies can't control these systems themselves, what guarantee is there that other operators will be able to control them, and what guarantee is there that bad actors won't be able to use them to wreak havoc? So I think that should be ringing alarm bells in the safety world, as it indeed it is. But I think the lesson for small medium enterprises is you must diversify, because the response of the US and potentially the response of China, although we haven't quite seen this in the same way yet, is nationalism, turning off the tap. And so the first response back to the Claude Mythos preview episode with Anthropic was the US saying only Americans can have access to this. And then that created huge problems for this technology, which is inherently global. So I think around the world, this was a warning that, you probably don't want to be relying on one country's or one company's systems for critical capacity. So that would be a push in favor of open weights, potentially open source AI systems, but that in turn goes back to the safety problem that the open weights, open source systems should not and probably will not be as powerful as the closed models. So again, the bottom line, I think, for small, medium enterprises is to diversify, that you don't want to be putting all your eggs in one company's basket.
Yeah, and I think for countries, they've been looking at sovereign AI and building their own hardware and resources and capabilities for that. But do you think...
So sovereign AI is a great way to sell NVIDIA chips. And the idea that every country should develop its own AI stack from chips to models and do everything themselves is, frankly, a very inefficient way of doing this. It'd be great, but to me, a good analogy would be GPS, global positioning systems, that you probably don't want to rely on one country's systems. That's why the Europeans developed their own, the Russians, the Chinese developed their own. But if you're a small country like Singapore, there's no way it would be practical to put up your own global positioning devices. And so you want to rely on different systems. You want to diversify that risk. But the idea that you've got that every country in the world should invest the trillions of dollars that it would cost, that would be a misallocation of resources, to say the least.
Do you have a view on whether companies should look into getting hardware or should they rely on the cloud?
So there's a widespread misapprehension that something is safer if you can lock the door behind it yourself. So on-prem data centers are safer because you can see the servers. But that also means that the security is on you. There is a certain benefit in scale in terms of security. There is a real problem with the cloud metaphor, because the cloud obviously is not actually a cloud up in the sky. It actually traces its origin back to an icon that was used in one computer system. But the idea that you would put all of your data in one location, to me, is a bit like saying you should put all your money under the mattress. Yes, it's safe, but it means you're in charge of safeguarding all those resources. The reason why we developed banks is that there are safe ways of storing money that also maximizes our usage of them. I understand at a kind of visceral level the desire to have control over something, but I don't think it makes much sense in practice, at least not at scale.
Are there any other risks that we might not have touched on yet before we dive into what we can do about them?
So I mean, the main way in which the safety community these days breaks up the risks is into malice, mistake, and systemic risks. So malice is the bad actors we've touched on. There's the mistake. There's a sort of misalignment question. The third category of risk is the set of systemic risks that we become over-reliant on these systems. And maybe that's something we'll come back to in the context of education. But if we outsource too much of our capacity, if we outsource discretion, if we outsource politics to these machines, then a whole bunch of negative consequences could follow, because by that process at an individual level of cognitive offloading, we become dumber in a very real sense. And if, as a society, we offload discretion, then we become politically less sovereign, back to your word, because we're relying on these systems, not just for optimization of things for which there is an objective answer, but we're relying on them for helping us make decisions where there is no objective answer. And this is one of the things that drives me crazy, that people talk, at one point, there was a suggestion that you could have ethics as a service, and that you could outsource your ethics, as if the reason why we still have debates over ethics is because we don't have enough data or enough compute to solve these problems. When I think the reason we debate ethics is there are some inherently insoluble problems. And even if we do come to an answer, that answer is not stable over time. So if, for example, you froze ethics, not now, but say 100 years ago, then you would have frozen in place a racist, sexist regime that would not respect all sorts of freedoms that we now take as kind of self-evident. So yeah, I think there are real risks at an individual level if we're over-reliant on our devices, and there's also real risks at a societal level if we give too much power to make decisions that we should be agonizing about on a daily or at least periodically through elections on a regular basis as a society.
Yeah, maybe we can touch a bit more about that over-reliance and what happens when AI is basically running our lives, running our companies even. And now agentic use is becoming more and more prevalent. I think everyone, or a lot of people are going to start using very much agentic tools like Codex, Cloud Code for their life and their work. But maybe if we were to just go a bit more into, over-reliance for our work, for the things that we do in life, what kind of effects have you seen that causing in, workers and students?
Yeah, so... Well, so I mean, some of this goes back to earlier than the AI moment.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that professors have been moaning about for a long time is our students don't read, at least not as much as we would like them to. And I think that's a larger kind of attention deficit challenge that we're facing. And you can track that we've had to reduce the amount of reading, not just at university, but at primary and secondary school. And so I think that is a real risk, that our ability to concentrate, to think deeply, that's foundational to many things that we've long regarded as the key to a successful and meaningful life. So that predates AI. But now with AI, you've got the ability not just to outsource reading, but to outsource writing. And so at the university, we really worry that our students can't write. And that's not just because we want them to write essays, but because many of us believe that writing actually helps you think through a question. And so if you use ChatGPT to help you compose an email complaining about some poor service, or you need to get something checked by a government agency, maybe that's fine because you're just being efficient in the same way that you might have otherwise paid a lawyer or got someone else to help you. But if it's like planning how to manage your holiday, like where to find a hotel, that's maybe a useful use, and you might have Googled in the past or paid a travel agent. But if it's what should I do with my life? What sort of job should I get? Who should I form a relationship with? Then these are questions that actually are at the heart of a meaningful life. And so that's the sort of thing I worry about, not just in my colleagues, but in myself. The temptation to say, well, I could think about this for 5 minutes, or I could ask Claude, and Claude will give me an answer in 5 seconds. But actually, many of the most meaningful questions in your life come from the struggle, come from the friction of grappling with the alternatives, and are that much more fulfilling. So that's true at an individual level. It's also true in terms of education, that the struggle is what actually helps build something into your identity, embedded in your brain, and then hopefully become something that you can draw upon in the future. Whereas the AI easy solution comes in and goes out pretty smoothly, as it turns out.
Hi there. I'm so glad you found this podcast. If you'd like to support us to help others flourish and have fun with AI, please consider subscribing, giving us a like, review, or comment on wherever you listen to your podcast, as that helps us keep the show running. In this case, I think a lot of people are starting to turn to AI as a companion, as an advisor, as a life coach, as a counselor.
And as a partner even.
How should we view AI?
Yes, I mean, if I could sort of wind back time, it would be an interesting thought experiment if we could avoid these systems referring to themselves in the first person and responding as if they're typing things out. Because I think both of those really encourage people to regard the AI systems as kind of beings of moral worth equivalent to themselves. And even though I don't currently see any path, in the near term at least, to AI sentience or anything we might call consciousness, I know many people do treat their AI system very much like a living person. And so a couple of problems come out of that. One is over-reliance, that the system that empathizes with you, that is sycophantic towards you, that flatters you, will make you more reliant on it because it's incentivized to maximize engagement. And so that will keep you engaged and make you more likely to rely on it. But secondarily, I worry that it will downgrade our capacity to have genuine human relationships because human relationships are not easy. They're challenging. They have ups and downs. And anecdotally, what we're seeing already in the short term is students being more willing sometimes to ask an AI agent or a chatbot a question than their professor. And if that's a sort of routine, regular question, maybe that's okay. But if it's a deeper question, that's kind of what the professor is there for. And what I worry we'll see in the near future is more and more people turning not only for kind of intellectual support, but also for emotional support. We've seen some of the biggest debates in this area have been in the context of mental wellness. And this, I think, is a really fraught area because on the one hand, there are tens of millions of people in the world who would benefit from some kind of counseling who will never get to see a human counselor. And it seems pretty clear that AI systems can be supportive in that context, can offer some help. It's also very clear that there have been some suicides and other forms of harm after engaging with these bots. And so I think there are real risks associated with that. And I think this kind of question, again, goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the risks. Because if I was developing a system at the university that could pretend to be your lawyer, your therapist, your partner, there would be institutional review board, ethics panels, human subject protocols to go through. None of that applies to the companies that are releasing these models out into the wild. And for the most part, governments are very wary of over-regulating them or imposing too much responsibility because there's a real fear of missing out and a realization that probably there is some economic advantage to allowing these systems to develop. But there's a very real human cost associated with that as well.
Yeah, I am guilty of some of what you've mentioned. I guess one of the pushbacks for what you said is also that, I can feed my computer my whole life. I can give it like notes for like my past 10 years of journals and it knows me better than like a coach would know me, example. And I think that creates a very real risk for that. But I also found that, when I use it for deciding whether I should, stay in a job or leave a job, I end up getting, I don't know, slightly more confused sometimes because there's just so much information. I wonder if you see any research on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's early. A good experiment I encourage people to do is have a chat with an AI system about a subject in which you regard yourself as pretty well versed or ideally an expert. And what you'll quickly discover is it's really good in some areas and not so good in others. Its judgment is patchy. And then if you contrast that with an area about which you know nothing, so for me, it would be switching from talking about international law or governance of AI and then talking about quantum mechanics. If I talk about quantum mechanics, it seems like a genius. And so if you then apply that back to yourself, if it's an area you know something about, then you can see the gaps, you can see the problems. But if you're uncertain or too deferential, then there's a real risk that you'll defer a lot of that responsibility. So, at the same time, it's a good thing to share one's concerns, share one's problems. If used properly and if prompted properly and you tell the system, look, all I want you to do is help me think through my decision, then they're probably going to be more useful. But if you start asking, well, what do you think? Irresponsible AI systems will start telling you what they quote unquote think. And there you need to go back to, okay, why is this system engaging with me? Who's paying for it? And what are the incentive structures behind it? Because if the system is incentivized to keep you engaged, you've got to keep in mind that's the reason it's engaging with you. It does not care about you. It does not want to help you. It wants to keep you engaged. And if giving you good career advice incidentally along the way is part of that, so be it. But that's not the primary incentive.
Yeah.
All that said, life coaches also take your money, and they have an interest in promoting themselves, or they're working for the company that's employing you. So yeah, I think the challenge in this space, as with the sort of information landscape generally, is how do we navigate between being so gullible that we believe whatever the machine tells us, without being so cynical that we don't believe anything anyone tells us. And I think that's a dilemma for all of us these days.
I guess getting pushed back into the real world is always important, or like getting pushed back into how we manage our relationships, how we relate to others. I think you've also framed AI at heart as a question of human dignity. I think you had a post on this.
I think the Pope probably did it better than I did, but
and what do you think that keeping the dignity or human dignity at the center like really requires of us?
Yeah, so when I was doing work on regulation and governance of AI, one of the questions that comes up is like, should AI have, or should certain forms of AI have legal personality? And I think the answer to that is pretty clear, that it could, but it shouldn't. And the reason is that, well, the reason it could is most legal systems have the capacity for creating legal personality. So you and I have legal personality under Singapore law, and Singapore law can create legal personality for companies. In some countries, you can have religious institutions. There's a river in New Zealand, the ecosystem of Ecuador. So you can give legal personality, but why? Why would you? And the short version of this is you might sometimes want to give legal personality to blame when something goes wrong, like if an autonomous vehicle crashes, you want to go after it, or to reward when something goes right. So if an AI system cures cancer. But actually, I don't think there's much merit in either of those arguments. I mean, the blame when something goes wrong, you don't actually want to blame the AI system. You want to bring responsibility to the company that set it in motion, perhaps, and make sure there's risk allocated properly. And in terms of reward, I don't think an AI needs an incentive like intellectual property, the way that humans and companies need incentives like that to justify the investment of time and effort. But there is a third reason why you could think about legal personality, and that is in case one day AI does succeed us, does become more competent, more powerful than us, the sort of thing Elon Musk waxes lyrical about. And if that ever happens, and I don't really see a path to it, then there might be an argument, well, actually, maybe we should be thinking about giving AI rights, because otherwise all we're doing, the only reason we preserve legal personality for humans is a kind of speciesism. And as I was grappling with this in the context of the book, I realized, yeah, actually, I believe that. I think we should. I think we should protect humanity in a legal sense against diluting that personality. And the reason is that humans create the law. Humans have, over centuries, over millennia, developed laws to try and bring out the better parts of ourselves. And the whole purpose of law is to give us peaceful means of resolving disputes. And over the centuries, it has also been a way of sort of slowly ratcheting up the, if you like, sort of human dignity. From an era where you could own slaves and that was unproblematic, you could commit genocide, that was unproblematic. These days, those would be barbarous. Colonialism has been outlawed. Racism, sexism is at least frowned upon. We've got changed attitude towards sexuality and things like that. So we've been sort of, it's the old sort of Martin Luther King line about the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So for all these reasons, I think humans should be very cautious about giving up our role in the center of our moral and legal universe, particularly to something that we've created, not out of the goodness of our hearts, but we've created through companies that are incentivized to make money out of this. And so, yeah, I think AI should remain a tool, a very useful, very powerful tool, but it should be a tool that serves us rather than the other way around.
So it's really about knowing and deciding as a species about what AI can judge and what it cannot. Because I think in your paper you also mentioned an AI robot judge.
Yeah, so China has really leaned into putting AI systems into the judicial process in a way that certainly many Western countries would be wary of.
Okay.
And that's partly because China has a slightly different approach to the rule of law, that the Supreme People's Court comes under the Communist Party. It arguably has a slightly more instrumental view of the law. And it also has a hugely complex legal system. But for the most part, judges are still in charge, but their discretion is reduced. I'm very wary of that kind of approach because the rule of law, which is something that's emerged over hundreds and hundreds of years and has spread around the world. In 2005, every member state of the UN said the rule of law is a good thing, partly because they didn't agree on what it meant. But if it means anything, it means the law is meant to govern us all. It's meant to apply to us equally, and that the law is sovereign. So the law is above even government, that government needs to be bound by law. So if you had the smartest AI system in the world, why wouldn't you just appoint it as judge to impose this? Well, two reasons. One, a bit like what we were discussing in the context of ethics, law is not static. Law needs to change over time. And so law is not just like predicting the weather. Law is an inherently political dispute. And the values behind it, the policy questions behind it will change over time. Secondly, the legitimacy of a judge's decision doesn't, this is not what judges usually like to hear, but the legitimacy of judge's decision doesn't come from being right. The legitimacy comes from us having in place a legal system that says this person or this group of persons gets to resolve a dispute. And the final, and you have appeals and so on, and so a judge can be overturned because he or she might not be right, but you have a final in Singapore Court of Appeal and the US Supreme Court that makes a decision, again, not because they're the wisest people in the world, although we hope they are wise, but because we need final decisions. And so there was a judge, I think it was Robert Jackson, who said of the Supreme Court, we're not final because we're infallible, we're infallible because we're final. And what that means is that their decision stands, whether it's the right one or not. And even as we've seen in the US Supreme Court, sometimes decades later they might overturn themselves. So for all these reasons, I think we should be very wary about handing over things like judicial power to AI systems, unless we're also willing to hand over political power. So putting it much more succinctly than I have in this rambling answer, I think we should have an AI Supreme Court only when we would also have an AI Prime Minister. And I would counsel great caution before going down either of those paths.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And maybe shifting gears into education, into our last section. I think you wrote a paper with Professor Loy as well on the role of universities. As you know, a lot of papers have been coming up. Some peer reviews have not been done extremely well as well. There are paper mills happening. Do you mind talking a bit more about the education system in terms of the role that it should play, especially when it comes to all these papers getting churned out, and what was the kind of future of education?
Yeah, so I mean, we've got actually a book coming out, The University Disrupted, on the future of higher education in an age of artificial intelligence. And yeah, you can see it in both the research and education. In terms of research, I mean, one of the big transformations in the last 15 or so years has been that a lot of research has moved from public to private, moved from universities, so the large language models of today, started in places like Stanford in the early 2010s, and some of the early models came out of these universities, but now they're almost all coming out of industry because they're so expensive, the amount of data, the compute, the talent required is all gravitated towards industry. And so you have some great outcomes like AlphaFold, which Google DeepMind led, got a Nobel Prize in 2024. There's great hope for medical advances, drug discovery, huge potential. But what AI is good at is not just quality, but quantity. And so, yeah, you mentioned paper mills. For decades, university academics have been obsessed by the publish or perish. And so the incentive at university is to produce ever greater quantities of ever higher quality research. Unfortunately, quantity is a lot easier than quality. And we are seeing examples of journals being overwhelmed by submissions. It's now trivially easy to produce sort of vast quantities of material. One statistic I like is that Amazon had to introduce a limit to the number of books you can publish. And I think the updated version is it's something like you can now publish 10 books every week. And so if you're publishing 520 books a year, you're probably not writing all of those yourself. I'm pretty sure you're not even reading all of those yourself. And so there is a real risk in academia that two things could happen. One is we get overtaken by industry, and in pure AI research that's already happened. But second, we get overwhelmed by the quantity of research coming out there. And so in that environment, there is a possible role for universities, not as necessarily just the originators of knowledge, but as curators, the people whose expertise doesn't mean that we necessarily come up with the new ideas, because AI quite possibly will be coming up with great new ideas, but evaluating them, judging them, curating them, that could be the role for academics. On education, I think this is a much more acute problem, because a big part of my responsibility at National University of Singapore is hopefully providing an education that does two things for our students. Hopefully it's both giving them a transformative experience that realizes their whole potential and so on, but also that makes them more employable. And this tension between whether my job is to help them be formed as individuals or just vocational training for their employment is something that actually is not, it doesn't go through the whole history of universities. It's really a mid-20th century phenomenon that trade-off became more current. Before then, university was very much about improving yourself. It was partly limited to a select few that could go, and was often seen more as a private benefit. And that's what happened through the mid-20th century, that university came to be seen as a kind of public good for everyone. And so the reason why universities like NUS get between 2/3 and 3/4 of our budget from government is there is this view that what we're doing doesn't just benefit the young men and women, the students who go through our doors, but it benefits the whole community. Partly because we produce research, partly because we produce graduates. And AI is raising questions about both of those. And so if we aren't seen as producing the cutting edge research, and if our degrees aren't seen as preparing people for the current batch of careers at least, then that could be a real problem.
Well, what would you say to students who are jaded because they don't want to use AI, while some students are zooming ahead and getting very good grades using AI?
So I would say don't cheat yourself of an education. And the temptation to take shortcuts is great, but the way to think about AI, again, is as a tool. And if you are cheating with AI and all you're doing is prompting, what makes you think an employer will ever need you to do that? The purpose of an education is not just to produce the essays and get the grades. It's to produce the wholly realized individual who can then go out and make a difference. And we see this when students go out and get into interviews, or when they get jobs. The grades you get at university, and I should say, don't cheat at university, you'll get caught and so on. But even if you manage to cheat and get the grades, all that's going to do is get you an interview. And then in the interview, it's other things that are being looked for, your ability to engage, to interact, to demonstrate EQ, not just IQ. And then in the job, if all you're doing is entering prompts, why is someone going to pay you a full-time wage for that work? So I think the challenge for students, and it's a real one, is that the world is changing very quickly, and employment is changing very quickly. And the job of me and my colleagues is to help prepare them not just for that first job, but for the ability to create opportunities over time, to adapt, to learn, to remain curious, flexible, and in particular to cultivate qualities that we haven't always been good at universities, which is not just the ability to answer the question given to you, but to come up with your own question, to demonstrate curiosity, diligence, but also the ability to communicate, interact with people, all these things that we've long called soft skills as kind of nice to have. I think over time those are going to become much more central to the university experience.
Will you say that answers what we should continuously be learning, or what should we be growing in to stay employable, stay relevant?
So partly, I mean, this is the cliche nowadays of universities, that the job of an education is to learn how to learn. I mean, it's kind of amazing that for more than a century, the idea has been you have primary education, secondary education, some proportion of people then do university or other kind of tertiary education. And those 3 or 4 years of tertiary education equip you for the rest of your life for your career. And that's just no longer the case. I mean, we've known for decades that now many people switch jobs. The half-life of information is now much, much shorter. And yet we have this idea that basically you should finish your formal education by, say, your early to mid-20s. I think the reality is we're all going to have to keep learning through our lives. This is where AI is both a curse and a benefit. It's a curse because, well, that's what's changing things so quickly. The benefit is you can actually use AI systems to educate yourself. So maybe coming back to your student question, don't just ask AI for the answer. Ask it to help you learn. And many AI systems can actually be quite good at that. If you tell them, look, quiz me or help react to my essay, do the first draft yourself. AI can be that very patient tutor, can give you more access to something approximating a human. I mean, don't do it to the complete exclusion of your professors and your peers in the classroom, but AI can give you that feedback, but you must resist the temptation just to ask not for feedback, but to ask for the answer.
Does that relate to skills atrophy as well for employees that are, getting worse in writing emails or getting worse in talking in meetings?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a study, for example, colorectal surgeons who used AI were more effective with the AI system, but they discovered, I think, after 6 months, if you took away the AI system, they were significantly worse at doing diagnostics. I think we're all familiar. Actually, well, maybe older listeners are familiar with having to remember telephone numbers or navigate using a map. And we kind of joke about not remembering telephone numbers now because they're all stored in our phone, or getting lost because Google Maps was offline. And there are reasons to be cautious about not being able to remember anything or to navigate. But I think it's much more serious if, when asked a question, if you can't come up with an answer without having to ask ChatGPT or Claude or some other system, then I think that's a real problem, not just for your employability, but for living a meaningful life.
Do you think AI would create or kind of reduce opportunities in the longer run, given what's happening? I think there was a Stanford study finding that there was some relative employment decline in the ages of 22 to 25, at least in that geography that they were studying in AI-exposed jobs. Like, what's your view on the vocational aspect, I guess, on
jobs, I mean, it's definitely going to disrupt. And almost certainly it will eliminate some jobs and create others. The question is whether whether there will be a mismatch. I think some people have assumed, and Dario Amadei was saying that 50% of white-collar jobs would disappear in 5 years. I think that's probably not the way to think about it. The way to think about it more is the risk in the near term is that jobs will be broken down to tasks and careers might be broken down to gigs. So if we go back to the student example, if all you're doing is prompting and doing something to get an answer, that doesn't sound like a full-time job. And if employers were able to break down their entry-level tasks, in particular the jobs that a young person might have, into a set of tasks, some of those will be outsourced to humans, some to machines. The risk then is that you'll have a whole bunch of people living in a gig economy trying to navigate away from full-time employment. So that's a long way of saying I don't know. The data is still coming in, but certainly the disruption to entry-level employment appears to be real. And so I think that just puts more of an obligation on us at universities to ensure that we're educating people not just in the abstract, but giving them practical experience. But I do think it also gives an obligation to all kinds of companies to think longer term. So if you're running a company and you think, I can do away with entry-level employees, this is great. It might be great for a couple of years, but then you're going to need to replace some of the more senior people. And if you don't have a pipeline of young people coming in, then where's that next generation coming from? Or if you just believe in the stability and value of the industry you're working in, then you probably want to invest in training young people. And I appreciate that's not always easy for companies, but if they want to be sustainable over the long term, that's an investment that's probably worth making.
What would you say to someone who's interested in this area of safety, governance, and how would you advise them to get deeper into the space?
So there's a huge amount of material online. You could ask ChatGPT or Claude, but I'd also encourage them to look at I mean, Singapore's Model AI Governance Framework has a whole bunch of use cases. There's the AI Verify Foundation, the safety report that Yoshua Bengio and others did. There's the global policy dialogues at the UN. So yeah, I would read widely and play around with the AI systems. You can ask AI systems about their own guardrails and indeed try different AI systems. So, I mean, I was doing a presentation. I wanted, in very short order, I needed an image of some cute image of an owl. It was about a thing for university. And so I got an AI image. And then I wanted it robbing a bank because it was about raising money. And so ChatGPT said, cannot, violates terms of service. Claude said, cannot, violates terms, Banana, cannot. So finally I went to Grok, and Grok said, sure, here's the owl robbing a bank. So you have very different approaches to these different systems. So yeah, read widely, test widely, but come to your own conclusions.
Yeah, Grok. Maybe I understand we're running out of time, but maybe one last question. What do you think has to go well in the next 5 to 10 years for us to live well with AI systems?
Right. So, I mean, I think at an individual level, don't be seduced by the lack of friction, because friction is essential to meaning. Friction is essential to education. You only learn through struggle. And friction is essential to meaning. Anything that any of your listeners have achieved in their life, if it was just handed to them on a platter, that's not their achievement. And so at an individual level, I would say, try first yourself. Don't just outsource meaningful things to AI. Do it first yourself. And then by all means, use AI systems to help improve. At a societal level, I really do think the window is closing for coordinated international action to guard against the most severe AI risks. And again, I'm not lying awake at night worrying about the Terminator. I'm worried about someone being able to use advanced AI systems to shut down a nuclear power plant, to crash a country's financial systems. And unfortunately, at the international level, that's the kind of crisis that has been necessary to bring about meaningful international regimes to address those kinds of global risks. So yeah, my hope is that we can, both as an individual, retain that sense of agency rather than giving it to the AI agents, and globally that we can put in place something that will, systems that will help avoid a true AI emergency, because if we don't do it to prevent the first AI emergency, it might be very difficult to prevent the second.
Yeah, thanks so much, Simon. Thanks for taking the time. Very insightful.
Pleasure, Eric.
And great to chat with you. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Code Riff podcast. We hope you learned and enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. If you'd like to support us, please consider subscribing, leaving a comment, like, or review on wherever you listen to your podcast. And we hope to see you in the next episode. Bye.